I have an illness called GTFO-GT syndrome. A lot of other people have this problem, but it's never really been addressed. Giant things fighting other giant things syndrome is a feeling of excitement when faced with towering monsters, robots, and aliens, duking it out with other beings of similar height. Now I wanted to bring this up because when I found out Pacific Rim was getting a sequel, I immediately knew I'd be in theaters on opening day to witness the spectacle of machine versus monster. But to my surprise, my enthusiasm wasn't shared with all my peers. Now, I had a great opportunity of seeing Pacific Rim 2 before its initial release on March 23rd, and I'll get into what I thought about the movie. But I also wanted to speak briefly about why its predecessor still holds up to this day. So please allow me to tell you why Pacific Rim is amazing, and why Uprising is even better. The biggest complaint I usually hear when I ask if they liked the movie is the story. Pacific Rim's story is just boring, there's no real meat to the plot, and most of the characters fall flat. And I can see why some people might think this. Yes, some of the characters aren't that impressive, but really were you watching the movie for them to begin with? When I see a poster with a giant robot towering above a city, my mind doesn't immediately jump to wondering what Bobby's up to this day. It jumps to a dream about crashing metal knuckles against alien skin. But that's what makes Pacific Rim so good. It's not an amazing story and it's not even incredible, but it's passable. A passable story allows for the Jaegers and the Kaijus to shine. That way they're not drowned by hours upon hours of pointless exposition, but just enough to get you by. Stories are important. It's very true. Just look at Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. Their stories are very important to the structure of the movie. But this movie's different. It doesn't rely on the story to be entertaining. That's the point. You don't need to go to a wrestling match and know about The Undertaker or Triple H in order to enjoy what you're watching in that ring. All you need to know is that there's action. And that story just adds a little bit of spice. Just look at Godzilla and Transformers. You'd think buying a ticket to a Godzilla movie you would be seeing a lot of Godzilla, when in fact you get a story about a soldier featuring Godzilla on the side. Or renting a Transformers movie, you'd think you get a decent movie about Transformers, but instead we have Mark Wahlberg not being a good dad and reimagining Transformers history class. But when you buy a Pacific Rim movie ticket, you're getting what you pay for. Giant robots fighting giant monsters. The movie knows you're there for that, and it delivers, and that's what the movie is for. A second issue I see arise is some viewers think it's just dumb. Why spend so much time on giant robot fights when you could just close the rift? Well, I'll tell you why. Because we wouldn't get this. Or this. Or this. Why would you want to take that away from someone? Pacific Rim is a work of fiction, and if you're willing to just turn off your brain and enjoy the action, it does a great job on taking you on a ride. I can assure you no one is thinking about how a roller coaster works when you're on it. You just follow the dips and turns as it takes you along its rails. But that's what this movie is like. It's like a roller coaster. You're just there to enjoy the ride. Nowadays it seems everyone's become a movie critic. Which, honestly, I can't really say much because I'm doing the same thing right now, but movies today seem like they need depth and insight and beautifully written characters. And although that makes for a great movie, it doesn't always mean that a movie that doesn't have that is necessarily bad. I would never consider Pacific Rim a theatrical masterpiece, but it doesn't have to be a good film. It set out to entertain, and it did just that. Lastly, it seems like a lot of people think this movie is for children. And really, it is. But it's also for adults. Growing up, I still fondly remember shows like Power Rangers, Ultraman, and Voltron because it allowed me to imagine a world where giants did battle to protect the world against creatures and enemies too great for our own power. But now that I'm older, I can still enjoy that. When I sat down in that theater waiting to watch Pacific Rim Uprising, not only were there kids sitting in front of me, but there was an entire row of adults behind me. It's definitely one of those movies that breaks an age demographic, which makes it universally enjoyable. The fact a father can equally enjoy a film with his 12-year-old son just goes to show not all movies have to be for one age group. So when someone tells me this movie is strictly for children, I recommend loosening up a little. So that's Pacific Rim 1. It has its flaws, nowhere near perfect, but it still works, and definitely worth watching if you haven't seen it. If you want a movie that has giant robots and giant monsters, you'll get your money's worth. Even if you don't fully agree with all I've said, I think Pacific Rim Uprising is a movie that might change your mind. Let me tell you why Pacific Rim 2 is even better. And don't worry, I'll keep things spoiler free. First off, it's a sequel, 10 years later from the events of the last film, so make sure you do your homework before you catch this one, because there are quite a few recurring characters. Now remember all those gripes I heard? This film addresses those issues. You now have a good story, and I can say that. It's not passable, but it's good. And the best part is, it doesn't overshadow the Jaegers or the kaiju, but instead, it illuminates them under a spotlight. The main cast is especially good. It's definitely a step up from the first movie. But they also brought back some fan favorites, which I'm really happy they did. Of course there is the typical archetypes, but that's okay, because we got action! There is double the action from the previous film, and even more Jaegers. And if you're one of those people who think it's just a dumb movie, well, you'll be happy to know we go full idiot on some of these scenes. The movie understands and knows it's a movie about robots against giant monsters in cities, wielding swords and shooting plasma cannons and whatnot, but that's okay. It understands that some things just aren't possible, but why apply science and understanding when, in fact, you could just watch this happen? And for all you people who think this is just for kids, give me a lollipop and call me Timmy, because I'm going back to see that movie again. This movie was so much fun to watch. I was actually upset when it ended, not because there could have been more, but because I was having such a fun time watching it. You know a film is worth your dollar when you want to sit back down and watch a movie from start to finish, all over again. That's why Pacific Rim is still an amazing movie, because no matter how many times I watch it, I still feel like those Sunday mornings sitting in front of the TV, action figures in hand and cereal on my lap. The fact they made a sequel that still instills that excitement in me, but also willing to change and improve itself, just made Pacific Rim 2 even better. Definitely go see this film. It's super fun and totally worth your time. I'm sure you'll walk away happy. If I had to rate this movie, it'd be hard, especially because I couldn't put it in the same league. Most of the movies I watch, I approach with critical analysis, and I watch how the movie is shot, and I make sure I see every scene. But this movie's different. I know it's not trying to be a masterpiece. It's just there to entertain us. Overall, I'd say it's about a 7 out of 10. But if we're talking about fun and just mindless action, it's definitely a 10 out of 10. It's totally worth it. I gotta say, thank you for sitting through my ramblings. I understand that nowadays it seems like everyone's a critic, but sometimes I feel like we just need to sit back and relax and really just take in a movie for what it is and not put it under a microscope like we usually do. Movies were invented to entertain us, and it allows us to relax and suspend our disbelief for just 2 hours. And honestly, I kinda wish we did that more. Suspend our disbelief and just enjoy a movie for what it is. Anyways, my name is Fan, and I suffer from GTFO cheat syndrome, and I'm happy I do.